Alright, this should be a quicker video. Just talking through, a bunch of people have been kind enough to mention some things I didn't know or got wrong in previous episodes of this. So just some corrections, some omissions, some reconsidering of people I should have looked at a little more closely. So first of all, on Beast Day, there was some confusion I had over that tournament because the bracket's very strange because Beast Day loses the quarterfinals and goes on to win the finals. So what happened was after Lionheart beat Beast Day in the quarterfinals, they chatted afterwards and Lionheart decided to forfeit. I don't know if that means Beast Day actually did win the semifinal match versus Sunukan. I should have asked. Um, but that is sort of how it happened. Still no idea why Lionheart forfeited. On Bren, I got this a little wrong. So in Triad Wars 3, CTX saw that Batusai was their opponent, and both Bren and another player were going by that name at the time or going by some name similar, and they challenged Bren to the match, to the rule set, and Bren was like, sure, and they played, and Bren beat CTX. And then they realized, wait up, I was supposed to play the other Batusai, not Bren. And they decided, as along with management, that Bren should be given that spot, and he went on to defeat the other Batusai, taking CTX's spot and going on to win the whole tournament. So he ended up playing an extra round and winning the tournament, despite having never, signed up to play it. Will we go to the next slide? No one knows. Firebrand. So Firebrand, I don't always know the multiple names people go by. I try to, when I learn, update everything. Firebrand also went by Neo and Neo Sky in other tournaments right after, but these don't end up helping Firebrand's case. He ended up going out in the first round a couple times and didn't add any runs. So it's good to know, thanks Dal for the information, but does not help Firebrand's case. Then we have Mafi Josie. Um, just few things added. Was a long-time player of no combo closed randoms, which is a rule set I really like. He played it because he could make the moves quickly at work. I really like the rule set for having really good structural understandings. I think it's the easiest rule set to develop that core structural sense. Um, and early on would prepare for tournament matches extensively. I think this is, kind of the story of a lot of players is you have that rush, you're really trying, and then you get good and can kind of coast on that and are not pushing so hard, and also maybe are a little less invested. So at the start, he would print cards to like test, which numbers work, how do the hands work, and then later dropped off on that additional effort. So there's some omissions. I didn't talk about the closed winners. So we have 4 players that won closed tournaments: Vid, the Crow, also known as Tauren, Raceland, Majir, and Delial. Now we've already talked about Vid and Delial, but we do have to cover the Crow and Raceland Majir, and I'm going to get to them shortly. We also have who went deep in closed tournaments, and these are players that have more achievement than I've so far given them credit for. Rhea we've talked about, but he also gets a runner-up in Garland. Dude Train and Vialva have not been talked about here, but also have quarterfinals in these tournaments. Zoom gets a finals, but is still not going to make this section. And Patriot got a runner-up, and we have talked about him. So we're going to have to reconsider both Reye and Pat, as they both got runner-ups. And Tezuka and Foyer get little boosts with quarterfinal icons from Onion Knight. So we're going to have to do some reconsideration. Tezuka and Foyer, it's a small enough addition to the resume. I'm not going to look much more into them than I have already. But for Reye and Patriot, they both got a finals, and that's a pretty big addition. I am ignoring a certain winner here, but there's some suspicious stuff around them, so let us move on quickly. So Reye. So if we count the finals in Garland as a full finals credit tournament, if we count closed as equal to open in tournament consideration, and I think one reason to credit open more than closed is I think it is less variance game to game. But something nice the closed tournaments did is they had best of 3 matchups. And even better, this one was a double elimination tournament. So if you lost a match, you could still play through loser's bracket to get yourself back involved. And Ray, in fact, lost in the first round. So each round of loser's bracket, you kind of have an extra round to play to catch up with winners. So when he ended up facing Vid in the finals, Vid at that time was 4-0, and I believe Ray was like 6 or 7-0, or 6 or 7-1 at that point. And went on to reset the bracket, meaning he beats Vid, putting them both on 1 loss, and then Vid beats him in the grand finals. Um, so if we give this full credit, then his achievement goes from 875 all the way up to 1375, which is the most of anyone outside of my top 24. So if we give this full credit, then Rei it becomes a very, very strong contender in this group. Also, when I calculated ELO just using closed tournaments, Rei is one of, if not the best, closed performer we have, basically on this run. Um, so I think this result ends up bringing Rei quite close to Tezuka, though depending how much you devalue closed, I'm not devaluing closed there basically at all. But if you want to value closed tournaments a little less, then he'll drop more. But it's gonna really jump him up. And then similarly, we have Patriot. And a 500 point jump actually does something that I didn't think had been done, which is he reaches 1500 achievement, which no one outside of my top 24 reaches. Patriot is the only player, and we've had great players. We have Tezuka, as mentioned, we have Jadat, we have Mafi Josie, we have Piggy Man, we have Bren, we have all these big names, and none of them hit 1500 achievement, and Pat reaches it with this closed finals. And Gilgamesh was 3 games per match, so the higher variance of closed is mitigated. I do think making this a little less impressive is 1,000 of his points come from a finals in a closed tournament and a finals in a Team Rhinoa. And Nightwish was the carrying half, though I think Pat played well. Um, so I think this gives him a bump, but I don't want to say he suddenly threatens that top 24. I think, there are, of course, players on Rhinoa teams who were paired with a great partner who was incredible and carried them, and they end up getting a finals, and they're, some of the, it's not that they didn't do well, but they're some of the less deserving finalists, and their teammate deserves a ton of the credit. Here, Pat was the weaker half of this team, though still a very solid component. Um, and so I think he moves up. I think he probably passes Amo and Kazdon, though you might disagree with that. But he's not going to get kind of into that maybe top 35 or maybe 40 range off this, I don't think. Um, and one thing that weakens him as compared to Rhea is Pat doesn't have any top, or has very few top opponents beaten. And I think this hinders his case because when you put him up against all the other people in this crew, he has some of the fewest wins against top level opposition. And I think that makes it hard for him to move up that high. Then we have Tauren. So Tauren wins Titus Una and also has a quarterfinals in addition, so 1125 achievement points. It's a peak rating of 2105, which is pretty good. In general, his open resume is not one good enough to qualify here, but is one where you can imagine, if they had played more, they would have ended up reaching the lower end of the kind of people we're talking about. And then he goes and wins a closed tournament. And so it's kind of tricky to place him because inactive but pretty good in open, kind of like a slightly weaker maybe Scythe level resume, and then play a few fewer tournaments, but then get a win in a closed tournament. And so if we look at ratings or world rank, he's not going to compare well to other winners. But aside his win, he has a bunch of solid middling results, some round threes, that quarterfinals, and where he falls really just depends on how you treat that closed tournament. And I'm not really sure what to do with the closed tournaments. And I think the thing I've decided makes sense to me is to give it full achievement credit, but continue not including it in the ELO rankings. So it ends up getting full credit compared to other tournaments in one place, but not in some other places. And I think that's a way of saying this is a very worthy tournament. Hope you can't hear the sneezes in the background. This is a very worthy tournament, but not going to quite give it the full credit because I don't really have a way how. I don't want to mix closed and open ratings. So I think he has a compelling case, and I'm not actually sure yet where I'm going to put him. Then we have Raceland Majir, and here we have another winner of a closed tournament without many good open results. He does get a semifinals in Triad Wars 13, beating Turds, but he also went 2-1 in the tournament and getting a semifinals for going 2-1, when usually that's for going 4-1 or 5-1. Just feels like, site tournaments at the end of the site are much easier to grab icons in and deep icons, and I think I want to, say that they're a lot easier to get. I think he was a good open player. He showed me a hand he made that was just sweet, and he says he played it really successfully against Seto, and I believe it. I think the cards are good in the sense that like Silver Dragon and Harloot are a typical level 7 pairing, but the other cards were quite creatively chosen and found really nice ways to work together, and so I think really showed clear skill there. And the problem is his case basically for just tournaments ends up being just Gilgamesh. And he beats Patriot, he beats Cookie, he beats FRM. These are good players, I think especially in closed, but just this one tournament without surrounding results is not going to be good enough to make the top 50. It's obviously very impressive, but the top 50 is really hard to make. So we got next. We got, no spoilers. Oh no. God, I hate it when it skips. So, is 3 icons enough? So every player that has at least 3 icons, but 5, has been discussed. And the ones left are Roseman, Spike, Doomtrain, Flare, Reeker, and Gambit X. So I guess that's 6. I can't count. So quickly looking at these, Roseman peaks in 2012. He gets a 2072 rating, but most of his time, I think, is a below average tournament player and then has a really nice run. And his high achievement score of 750, the highest in this group, comes from being the secondary player on a team with Delial. Though Delial has said Roseman played great that tournament, and as well as Delial did until the finals, where he just assumed he'd lose and didn't put up a competitive match against Deli. Spike had a short run at the start, but also peaks at exactly 2072, which I think is pretty funny. Doomy, like Roseman, Doomtrain, or Elwood Blue, starts off losing a bunch and gets below average rated for a while, and then makes a really nice run hitting 2072. And this is something I think I'll get at more in the next video. But if you want a high peak on your ELO rating, you want to start well and have your losses and your bad results come after your peak, not before. Because if you start with getting a really low rating, which Doomtrain got a pretty low rating at the start, and then you start adding up results, some of them are just making up ground. And so while Doomy's peak is the same, I think the point he started at suggests probably an actual form peaked a bit higher than the other two. But I think it's very goofy that these players all peaked at 2072. Flare peaks a little lower, Reeker peaks a touch higher, but basically none of these players have quite the achievement or peak to make this group. Most of the players we've talking about break at least 2100 or they grab a championship, and none of these players do. They're firmly kind of in the 60 to 80th range all time, I think. These are good players, especially at their peaks. Kind of 2012 plus Doomtrain, 2012 plus Roseman, or 2000 kind of 4 and 5 Spike are all, I think, very good players, but either leave the site or don't sustain it long enough to start amassing the resume that some of these other players have. Gambit X, I think, deserves a little more coverage here, earning 4 icons and peaking a bit higher. Went by multiple other names, making it a bit tricky to keep track of, Dracula and Sinister, but a peak rating of 2131 and a peak world rank of 12th is pretty good and starts comparing with people we've talked about in previous videos. Steadily good but non-spectacular results. Never makes a semi-final, but really reliably getting some round 3s, some round 4s, steadily putting up over 50% performances. Has beaten some really good players in C17, Suikoden, Kazakh, and Turds, but none of them were against their peaks, I noticed. The Kazakh win is early before Kazakh has his deep runs. The Turds win is early. Suikoden, outside of his championship, never plays all that well, except for clan events where he plays great. And C17 was, I think, during a comeback after having not played for years. So, to me, Gambit X looks like someone who really consistently beats mid-tier and weaker players, but does not perform well against the high-tier players. And this is very normal stuff, and he does this at a high level, but I don't think it's quite a high enough level to make the top 50. But I do think overall Gambit X is the best player I haven't yet considered. And would easily make a top 75, might make a top 60, but is not going to make the top 50. So I think what's changed is that Ray and Pat, with their finals results in closed tournaments, have both really increased their chances to make the list. I think are now big favorites to make the top 50, which I'm not sure they were before. or maybe if they were making it, have moved up the list a few slots. And Tauren, I'll need to think a bit about and decide whether his numbers are good enough to make it. Raceland and Firebrand both have their tournament wins, but the supporting stuff just isn't there. And so even with, compelling championship runs, they don't have the overall resumes. Beastay and Bren still have the two strangest tournament wins in TTA history, but this didn't actually change anything, and they'll be placing about where they placed before. So that's all I got today. Nothing too exciting here, but I did want to do one last video of corrections and just things people clued me in on, and then the next one we'll get in a top 50, and I'll actually do the full list and we'll see how it looks.